Inclusive workplaces. This is a hopefully a kind of 10-step process in order to kind of look at what we think are kind of the most effective strategies and tools for inclusive workplaces. Quick introduction from myself. So I'm Matthew Timmis, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Aim Forward. I've got 20 years in experience in the neurodiversity and disability sectors, experience with both working with teams, in workplaces and in education settings as well. My passion is essentially enabling people to perform to their best, whether that's across an organisation or the individual themselves. Aim Forward is an industry-leading provider of diagnostic assessments, workplace needs assessments, and also coaching and training, ultimately trying to create personalised strategies to help individuals learn and work their way. We can help you on your inclusive journey, supporting neurodivergence, mental health, and physical health. So the agenda for today, hopefully we're going to look at quite a few different points. I'll be kind of whizzing through them. We don't have loads of time. Obviously, there's loads more detail that we could go into on every single one of these key points. But I just wanted to talk you through this kind of wheel of kind of 10 ideas, 10 strategies that we think are really helpful. So the first half of this wheel, the segment, is really about the individual. And then the second half is much more about the workplace and policies that you can put into place to support inclusive workplaces. You can say inclusive, productive, it kind of spans both areas as well. So hopefully to start with, we'll look at like improving awareness. We think that's a key kind of foundation block. We'll look at time management, flexible working, communication, different pieces of assistive software or AI that can support individuals, physical adjustments, DSE assessments, etc. Then moving on into policy areas such as disclosure, diagnostic or needs assessments, well-being policies and processes such as like a mind wellness plan, reasonable adjustments for those individuals, and then also like data collection and reporting. And hopefully that kind of whistle stop will give you guys a good kind of flavour of some of the kind of key things that we're looking at today. So when we're talking about inclusive workplaces, what is this actual webinar designed around? Really, it's about neurodivergence, mental health, physical health, so neurodivergent conditions such as dyslexia, ADHD, autism, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, Tourette's, mental health conditions such as anxiety, depression, OCD, bipolar, eating disorders, and then into kind of physical health as well, to think about things like sensory impairments, hearing impairments, visual impairments, maybe chronic pain, things like that, that we can look at today in terms of how do we make our workplaces as inclusive and removing barriers as we can to ultimately enable happy, confident, productive workforce that feels supported by their employer. So moving into some of the kind of one-to-one areas, the kind of looking at the actual employees themselves, the individuals. How do you support that individual? How could you be supported best in the workplace? So for the employer, it's definitely around awareness. So from the employee's perspective, maybe it's about sharing that awareness and enabling those conversations. From the employer's perspective, it's really about asking questions, listening to those individuals, asking questions about how could you help, how could you design your communication more efficiently, how could workflows and work processes work best for you, how does your condition, your diagnosis impact you, particularly in the workplace. Could be from a day-to-day perspective, there could be very specific significant impacts, or there could be rather small impacts that don't really come up in kind of day-to-day conversations. But if you ask the right questions in a comfortable, relaxed setting, then you can start to have those conversations, start to have that dialogue. The other thing to think about from maybe a line manager's perspective is also raising that awareness of the specific condition. So asking questions is always the first way to go. Everyone's diagnosis is individual to them. But also, can you do a little bit of research? Could you have a Google of that specific condition if you're trying to support a colleague? Raising your awareness of ADHD or autism can really help. For example, looking at the like autistic charities, the awareness content and information that's provided on their websites can be really helpful, particularly in a workplace setting. Our website, for example, you're able to get lots of condition-specific information. You're able to look at blogs and information about how specific conditions might impact on a day-to-day perspective in the workplace. Watching a TikTok video on ADHD might be a little bit helpful, but it's not going to give you that broader awareness that something that's a bit more kind of research and kind of thorough would be able to provide you. So backing yourself up with a bit of research, but also really then listening, asking questions, starting that dialogue. Things like language. What language does that individual feel comfortable using? I've worked in this sector for 20 years and still feel like I can trip myself up at the next kind of conversation. It is a little bit daunting sometimes starting those conversations. Will I say the right thing? Will I say the wrong thing? Can I offend that person? It's really about being able to ask those questions and then mimic some of the language that individual might be using. But ultimately, don't make any assumptions. Everyone is different. Everyone's individual diagnosis is different, and it's about understanding that and being able to listen and support that individual and respect their kind of language. And it's not something that you'll learn overnight. Could take a little bit of time. Allow yourself that time. Don't feel daunted by saying the wrong thing or what have you. But in order to raise that awareness, you're then supporting that individual, but a wider cross-section across the workplace. Having those conversations raises that awareness. People feel much more comfortable then to start having those conversations with their line managers, with their employers, when they can see that A, other people are doing that, and B, that the response is positive as well. So moving on from awareness, that we think is a fairly fundamental building block. One of the next things that we notice throughout most of our kind of assessments or kind of contact time with workplaces can be around time management and flexible working. One of the kind of key points that we might get at the moment is during an assessment, for example, we can't provide flexible working. The individual has to be in the office X number of days. It's not a reasonable adjustment. We can't look at that as a reasonable adjustment. That's absolutely fine. A reasonable adjustment is exactly what it says. It is about what is reasonable, what is that workplace, what are the policies within that workplace, and what is being kind of conducted across the board. So it's not necessarily about providing flexible time or working from home. It might be, but there's loads of other adjustments as well. So starting off at something like scheduling. So an individual with, let's say, ADHD might have real difficulties with initiation. So starting a task, finishing a task. So being able to support that individual with a little bit more detail on those tasks. When does it need to be completed by? How does the first step happen? Give an example of a document that you've created before and said, this is the, I'm wanting something like this. This is the process that I use. Is that something we can start to implement with that individual? So it's about being able to kind of start with those small different chunks, using then organisation tools, techniques, strategies, being able to leverage the kind of calendar systems in Outlook, or whatever calendar system that you're using. It's free, it doesn't cost anything, but being able to manipulate that and use that, having set up processes within emails or within Slack or within whatever communication tools that you're using to make sure that that individual who might have difficulties with organizational time management isn't just flooded with hundreds of emails in their inbox and they're not able to kind of process what the actual task at hand is. Being able to support those different processes, little adjustments can make a huge difference. Then actually allocating time to tasks. So this is the task that needs to be required, full stop. Can be nice to have that open-endedness, that trust in that individual, but some people might actually prefer a much more specific, how much time do I need to commit to this when you need it by, being able to be quite specific where it's required. So an individual with autism may really benefit from that and request that. An individual with ADHD might feel as though that's micromanagement, no, leave me to my own devices. But it's about finding those adjustments and finding the nice balance between those things. And then working hours and patterns. If an individual had, for example, let's say chronic pain, whereby early mornings, actually their productivity at work is going to be significantly impacted by pain levels, like brain fog, like being able to kind of process, recall and implement information during those specific periods of increased pain. That's regular, it could be in the mornings or it could happen sporadically throughout the day. Having those conversations with that individual so that they can feel comfortable, actually, for this hour, I'm not going to be productive at work, but I'm going to make that back at this time. So it's not about taking or kind of removing hours throughout the day. It's about having that flexibility because of their specific diagnosis, that you could look at a reasonable adjustment to support and enable that person to be as productive as they can. Now, this slide looks back to front, and it's not supposed to be back to front, but when we first uploaded it into our webinar system, it back to fronted itself, is that a word? But I've always left it in like this because I quite like the idea of it does, there is no one size fits all with regards to communication. So an individual might like structured communication, they might like unstructured communication, they like formal or informal, they might like people focused, it could be task focused. Communication is a really complex area, and if I had a little one size fits all nuggets, then we'd probably be, I wouldn't be delivering this. I'd be a very wealthy man. I wouldn't need to be doing any in terms of yeah, it's a complex area. So the area that the thing that we see most often with regards to from a training perspective when we're working with workplaces, how do I communicate best with my team? There may be an individual in that team whereby communication feels like it's not working properly from either the employee perspective, from the line manager's perspective. How do we start to iron those kind of challenges out? And also, what is reasonable? I can't go over and above to restructure or redo a lot of my communication tools just for an individual. So how do we make those changes across the board? It's really complex, but it's about having those conversations. It's about getting the individual to ask questions to that individual, but also as a wider team, how do we best communicate as a team? What information is unstructured, what is structured, how do we kind of break that down, and what information can we change and adapt in terms of being able to kind of be as kind of productive as possible. What I would say as well in terms of communication or setting kind of communication processes, it's also about being patient. So for example, an individual with ADHD might find unstructured work or tasks challenging. They might need to have the exact structure so that they can fit their time around that. They know exactly where they're at. They know if they're getting behind on that work. But even then, issues could arise, or that process of communication paths could get put in a folder and then forgotten about, or not used. It's quite a common trait in terms of forgetting, putting that set and forget and put that to the side, then you don't refer back to that communication process. And so as the line manager, for example, you might think, actually, this is really frustrating. I've given really clear guidance. I've used the right communication that that individual wants, and it's still not quite right. What am I doing wrong? Some of these processes can take time to implement. So it's giving yourself that time to be able to implement some of these processes. It's kind of two-way element to that, so that individual with regards to ADHD might feel really bad that they've been given all that information, and actually they've still not quite done it the way that it was supposed to do. They're probably beating themselves up, but next time it might be a little bit better. Next time it might be a little bit better. There could come a point, actually, this isn't working. We need to reassess this and reevaluate and look at a different option. But yeah, complex area, no easy, specific, quick win fix, other than being able to kind of ask questions, work it out as a team in terms of what works best for you guys. Another area that is quite individual focused, I guess it's kind of company policy in terms of from a funding perspective of costed software, but there is so much assistive software available now. Whether you say assistive software, whether you call it AI, the amount of free inbuilt software within Microsoft, within Mac, within Google is quite, the advances are incredible, and the benefits, if you can get the right piece of software or the right tool, can have huge benefits. So some of these are costed pieces of software, but there would be like free versions that are inbuilt into other operating systems. So the first two, for example, TextHelp and Clara, you might have heard of them as text-to-speech software. So that might be where you have a large report or a document that you need to read. And if you have, for example, dyslexia or weak working memory, being able to process that text is really difficult. If you have it read aloud to you, you can process it much more quickly. You can process it more accurately. You're making less mistakes if you hear it and see it. So if it's going in through the eyes as you're reading it, and also at the same time you're hearing it, it's like a dual input, and your working memory and your processing speeds or processor can identify the words much more accurately. And so it can speed up the reading process and also the accuracy of it. Really helpful for proofreading your own work, for example. Things like Dragon Naturally Speaking are the opposite, so that's speech to text, whereby if I'm talking now, the words will be appearing on the page and can really speed up the composition process. You're not having to worry about spelling mistakes, things like that. People might have heard of Grammarly, Ginger. Global Autocorrect is similar, whereby it's like an automatic spell checker, which is much more comprehensive than Word. You also have things like mind mapping software, and then other areas such as like Brain in Hand, which can be super helpful for conditions such as autism, mental health conditions as well. Physical adjustments in the workplace. So you're looking here at like DSE assessments, so like being able to have the right display screen. Is your the desk at the right height? Is it a height adjustable desk? Have you got the right type of chair? Is it an ergonomic chair? Is it an adjustable chair? The amount of workplaces that we go into whereby the workplace, the employer is funded ergonomic chairs, but the individual has never set that in the ergonomic chair up to their unique height, size. Oh, I didn't realise that this armrest moved, or this headrest moved, or I didn't realise this button did this. It's amazing to spend a little bit of time with that equipment can make a huge difference. Again, particularly with regards to working from home, so being able to make sure, yes, we might be able to have eyes and be able to see everything that's happening in the workplace. Is all the setup correct? Have we got large monitors at eye height so that we're not having to look down at a laptop screen, but what's actually happening at home. If individuals are working at home, working remotely, are they using laptop risers? Are they using separate keyboards, mice? It's all well and good having that set up in the workplace, but from an employer's perspective, from everyone in terms of their kind of back health, super important. But even more so with regards to if you had a physical diagnosis of like a scoliosis of the spine, if you had dyslexia, and in terms of being able to concentrate and review text, having two monitors so that you can look side to side rather than up and down, can improve your accuracy of reading, being able to have the right kind of monitor brightness so that you're not kind of from an energy level perspective, you're able to kind of work longer with the right setup. Always super helpful. If there's a specific condition, more complex condition, so like scoliosis of the spine, you might want an external ergonomic assessment to be conducted for that individual. The information here looks a bit boring, but actually the HSE government webpage, it's got everything in there is correct. Like it's super simple to follow. As I say, it's not the most exciting kind of PDF you'll ever see, but the concept is all there. And if you follow that process, your employees are going to be set up much more efficiently than they might be. That kind of brings us kind of halfway through the session today in terms of we've covered areas that impact more on an individual perspective. This side of the session is a little bit more kind of policy from a workplace perspective. How do we create the kind of most inclusive workplace that we can? First step on that process, again, really challenging, can be really complex, but encouraging disclosure. Most importantly, before that, well, at the same time as that, understanding as a company, why are we requesting disclosure? What are we going to do with that information? And ensuring that employees know what you're doing with that information. It's no good just disclosing and then not doing anything with it, or having that quite sensitive information sat in your data systems that someone else could be either nervous of or worried about, or from a data kind of perspective, you want to make sure that you're only collecting that for the required reasons. But enabling you then as a workplace to put in the most effective inclusive practices. If you've got that data, got that information, it doesn't have to be specific to the individuals, but across the board, if you've got that data, X number of employees have this condition, X number of diagnoses available. Here, you're able to much more effectively look at what's the physical condition of the office in terms of supporting that workforce. In terms of getting disclosure, it can be really difficult. Many people don't disclose. I think it's something like that. 30 to 40% would not tell their employer that they have a specific diagnosis. But being able to use tools such as like needs assessments or diagnostic assessments, screeners, you are able to support those individuals through those assessment processes. It's giving that support to them, but also you're then able to have that data in order to then, from a wider company perspective, know what you need to do. But I would say it is a complex process, and kind of individual fear, kind of stigma in terms of disclosing. The best way of preventing that is having that open discourse. So maybe having executive or team leader be able to communicate to the team or disclose themselves in terms of having that kind of communication path, or having like specific like resource groups, so that you can start to have those conversations, and then that disclosure can come through that. Another area from a kind of company-wide perspective that you could look at is enabling assessments and training with regards to kind of neurodiversity and disability. So diagnostic assessments can be super helpful in terms of from an individual's perspective, knowing, do I have ADHD, do I have dyslexia, and then what is the kind of cognitive profile that I have. So diagnostic assessments can be super helpful, both for the individual and then for from the workplace perspective, in terms of knowing, okay, from a reasonable adjustment perspective, the best solutions would be this, this, and this. Then you can move into also workplace needs assessments. So quite often people would have a diagnostic assessment. Okay, I have diagnosis of dyslexia, but what do I do next? The next stage might be a workplace needs assessment that looks at, what does the diagnosis mean? What does the actual report mean? It's loads of complex words. It's 30 pages about cognitive profile, but it doesn't mean anything to me. You can sit down with an expert to actually understand what is that diagnosis, what is the day-to-day impact on me as an individual, and then what are the best strategies moving forwards to remove some of those barriers. There's certain things that you might never be able to remove, but with a specific strategy, you could make that faster. Or you can use assistive technology, software, AI, in order to circumvent some of those barriers. Another kind of external support area could be training and coaching. So going right back to that awareness piece, having that kind of awareness training to the whole organization, or to specific teams, or to line managers, or to execs. It can then either filter down or filter across. That knowledge and awareness is only going to then be able to increase that ability to create a really inclusive workforce. And go back into that, the word inclusive and then productive, like they really sit hand in hand. If you have a really inclusive workplace, the individuals who've had barriers removed are only going to be happier, more content, more productive. And then you could also look at coaching for individuals. So it might be that you could train wider teams, but then for individuals, you might be recommended a piece of technology, but how do you actually embed that as a habit? How do I embed new strategies? Right, there's a new communication technique that I'm using with my line manager. How do I actually embed that so that I'm not just forgetting about it? So you might have like weekly, fortnightly, monthly coaching sessions in order to kind of that would be like neurodivergent kind of specific coaching sessions. One area, and I'll touch into this again here, in terms of workplace needs assessment, I think a lot of companies now know what a diagnostic assessment is. You can certainly see from an NHS perspective the waiting lists for autism, ADHD are through the roof. Privately, it's obviously a lot better. It's a service that we offer, but in terms of those waiting times, they are considerable. A lot of people are accessing diagnostic assessments. People know probably a little bit less about needs assessments, and then again, people know a bit more obviously about training and coaching. But just to touch into what a workplace needs assessment is or does, the kind of 10 strategies that we're going to talk about or have been talking about today, you could probably break most of those down into a needs assessment. So a needs assessment is for an individual, it's conducted by a specialist assessor that would have expertise in their specific condition or neurodivergence, and it breaks down kind of their working day, as it were, into things like reading and research, writing composition, maybe note-taking in meetings, time management and organisation, environmental factors in terms of the office, DSE equipment, access arrangements, and then it looks at strategies across all of those areas. And you could call those strategies reasonable adjustments, but it could be anything from assistive technology through to different working practices in terms of whether it be flexibility or process-driven kind of time management processes. And then also like well-being, so looking at the more holistic kind of process. How do we look at stress levels, energy levels throughout the day? What is the impact of their condition, and how do we best support that from an individual perspective and then across the workplace itself? Touching on well-being, so another area that could be a kind of cross-company policy or process could be like well-being plans or processes. One example might be the Mind Wellness Action Plan. This is available through the Mind website, and it's a really easily actionable plan that could be fitted into induction programs. It could be conducted during PDPs or appraisals. It's helpful from the line manager's perspective. It talks you through that process of how to deliver the action plan. But I would kind of caveat it with, it is a little bit daunting. Like to ask some of those questions can feel quite sensitive. It's the first time that you do it, you will probably feel a little bit nervous. You will feel like you might be saying the wrong thing. But taking a little bit of time just to work through that plan, maybe getting some training or some advice from peers or other team members that might have conducted something like this before, can really help sort of settle that kind of feeling. But from an employee perspective, we get really great results and lots of positive feedback that my employer is concerned and wanting to support my mental health whilst I'm at work. And not only is the benefit in supporting that mental health, it's that feeling of care and kind of provision of support for those individuals. And I would conduct this with all employees. It wouldn't be specifically because an individual had a mental health condition. I think they're really valid questions to ask throughout the workforce. So reasonable adjustment action plans, we touched on reasonable adjustments in the needs assessment. So if you had a needs assessment conducted, you would get a reasonable adjustment action plan. It would be the employer's responsibility to decide what is reasonable. So what is actionable from those recommendations, and that's a two-way process of agreement. But you don't have to have a needs assessment in order to conduct a reasonable adjustment action plan. It could be delivered from HR, it could be delivered from a line manager in terms of how is that individual's neurodivergence, mental health condition or physical health condition impacting them at work. It's about asking those questions and listening to those answers. And there's loads of kind of plans and kind of pro formas that can be available, and it's about noting those things, the key impacts, and then what could, as the employer, what could you do in order to maybe remove some of those barriers? What is reasonable, what is not reasonable, how long could that take, and then how are we reviewing that? Is it still working a year later? Is there anything else that's come to light? Is there a new condition that's been disclosed? Those sorts of things in terms of kind of reviewing that information. But again, it's about the employee feeling really supported and listened to. I think is really valuable. And then finally, this is going to be an area of increased kind of growth over the next few years. In 2024, the Labour government initiated the disability pay gap reporting for companies over 250 employees. The current stats are, I think it's just over 17% difference in pay gap between a disabled employee and a non-disabled employee. 17%. That is equivalent to roughly 2 months of free working, or just over £4,000 per year for a disabled employee that is not compared to across the board non-disabled employee. And that's really significant, and that is going to be a significant kind of focus area across the next few years, and larger employers are going to lead the way in terms of that data collection and reporting. It's going to be really difficult for them, going back to that disclosure piece. It is hard to get that data and that information, but ensuring that it's done in the right way for the right reasons and that upfront kind of nature is provided. But also trickle through to SMEs and smaller companies because it's the right thing to do. And so that kind of, that being able to report and kind of collect and kind of move on that information and that data is going to be a growth area. What can you do at the moment? So things like a diagnostic assessment, something like a needs assessment, that is going to provide you with that kind of rich data in terms of the disclosures. That also you could look at like diagnostic screening tools, so that you're supporting that individual, but you're also then able to, as a workforce, be able to analyze that data so that you can most effectively support everyone across that organization. But it is complex, and it's going to be complicated in terms of implementation. So I feel like I've whistle-stopped toured around some of our kind of top tips, strategies, call them what you like, kind of 10 kind of key areas. First half being kind of more individual focused. So being able to kind of, improve that awareness, being able to ask those questions, being able to have that two-way dialogue through to communication, time management, being able to implement specific reasonable adjustments like assistive software or display screens or ergonomic desks or whatever it might be. Then all the way through to kind of more policy-driven processes such as disclosure or assessments or well-being practices, and then reasonable adjustment plans as well. But I would like to just finish with the kind of depends what point you are on this journey. But I think it is really important to kind of put that into perspective in terms of how do you start this process, where do we start this journey? And it's all about those small implementable changes to begin with. It might be that you look at, well, what free internal assistive tech or AI are we using? How do we roll that out? What chairs have we got in the office? All the way through to let's implement reasonable adjustments, or actually let's bring in external experts to conduct assessments or needs assessments or screening, whatever it might be. It's all about starting small and knowing that actually this is quite a complex area. Us as experts are always learning, and everyone is individual. So there's no one size fits all. There are company policies that are that will benefit across the board, but in terms of those actual reasonable adjustments, you have to ask the question to that individual, and you can't pull that diagnosis away from that person. And it's about being able to listen and then have that confidence to say, actually, yes, this is a reasonable adjustment, or actually, no, this is not a reasonable adjustment. And that might be internal, or it could be external support that you get in to kind of make some of those decisions. But ultimately, I think just being in this webinar and in this space, you can all give yourselves a kind of sort of round of applause or sense of feeling that actually, we are on that right path because we're here, we're trying to listen, we're trying to understand, we're trying to get as much information as we can in this kind of fairly complex space and complex area, so that we can provide the best kind of environment for our employees, both from a supportive perspective and then ultimately to a kind of productive to perspective as well. So thank you for your time. Hopefully that's been really helpful, useful, at least triggered some questions, some of those areas you might have thought about before, but actually it's triggered, we could think about this, or we've been implementing this, we could do this differently. But if you have any questions, or there's any specific questions about the webinar or about just inclusive practices in general, I am around for the next at least the next hour to 2 hours. You can contact the head office directly. My direct number is on 07515258754. You can contact me directly, or call through to the head office and you can put through to myself. I'm quite happy to kind of have a chat and answer any questions that you might have. But ultimately, thank you so much for attending, and hopefully see you again soon for our kind of next step on our kind of webinar journey to more productive and more inclusive practices.